can't actually see a thing. Are you there? When you're giving a serious talk, the one thing that you definitely don't want is to follow the comedian on. But there's been a theme, I think, today of change, of breaking the mould, doing things differently. So I think I'm in the right place. I went for a coffee a few weeks ago, and I bumped into a friend. And he asked me how I was. Fairly innocuous question. And I said, well, I'm fine, but I'm busy. And to be honest, I think I was fishing for a bit of sympathy. It was the sort of busy that I thought he'd go, and commiserate with me. But that's good. That's good news, isn't it? Busy. Because we think of busy as good, don't we? Busy is worthy. If we're busy, we're being useful. We're contributing. But I think there's a dark side to busy. It's that busy that has us awake at 5 a.m, worrying about the day to come. It's the busy that has us microwaving our dinner rather than preparing something beautiful like Suleiman would have wanted us to. It's the busy that makes us neglect exercise. And in the workplace, it's the busy that has us in the ruts of something relentless and unforgiving. Our prehistoric brains, and I'm thinking of mine as much as anyone's, struggling to keep up with technology. And it's a technology which allows us to be in every loop and controlling every detail. But this level of control and connectivity, gosh, it's seductive, isn't it? But I think it's really toxic. I think it's set a trap for us, and we have jumped right in. And it's created a way of being which I don't think is sustainable. I think it makes us less happy, less resilient, less productive. Octavia Hill founded the National Trust, and she talked about us needing space. She said that we need space to get that sense of quiet from which the whispers of better things come to us. How was your lockdown? It makes you shudder, doesn't it, to think about it? Mine started badly. In a few, honestly, terrifying weeks, I felt like I was losing everything. All of my work pretty much closed off. But after a while, I got into a bit of a routine. It was a lovely summer, wasn't it? I mean, we were, this is very English, we were lucky with the weather. But I'd start my day sitting outside with a coffee and kind of maybe go for a bit of a walk. And I just recovered, almost against my will. I recovered. And I started to feel healthy and relaxed. And then I started to create. I started to want to put some ideas on paper. And over the next probably 2 months, two and a half months, I did things which I had always wanted to do, but had never had the time for. I wrote the book, the leadership book, but I also wrote or scripted 30 videos about leadership. And for me, that pause, that pause that I didn't want, I couldn't have thought of anything worse when it came, but that pause I didn't want was actually really useful, really powerful. And when you think about it, pauses are everywhere, pretty much apart from our working lives. There's the pause in Formula One racing, that's the pit stop, where cars whizzing around the track, really tense moments, maybe they're in the lead, and they stop, And that must be excruciating. But they stop and the car gets a micro service and the tyres get changed. And then the car zooms out of the pit stop, more powerful than it went in. This idea is in art. I was talking to the sculptor, Charles Hadcock. Charles does these remarkable geometric compositions. There's one in Holland Park. There's one on Brighton Beach. I think there's one in Canary Wharf. And they're these geometric shapes, these big things cast in metal, but there's always a bit missing. And I asked him about this, because you can see it. You think, gosh, did he not finish that? And I didn't put the question to him like that, obviously. But he says it's to draw people in. He talks about the void describing the whole, but the idea is it pulls people in. It makes you use your mind to work out what would be there. We get pauses in music, don't we? Some people would say in music that the pauses are as important as the notes. And when you think what the pauses are there for, they give the performer a bit of a breather, actually, a bit of time just to get their breath. But also they give the audience time to understand what's going on, to sort of reflect on the music, the time to feel the music. And they've got some utility as well. The pause often leads to a change in pace. And you'll have a piece of music that you particularly love. And if you're playing it in the car, it's the pause where you kind of get excited and you think, I know what's coming next. And then you belt out the next line. The pause gets you emotionally involved. So these pauses in music are powerful. There's a piece of music, and as I'm going to explain, I use the term very loosely, but by John Cage, and it was written, and I use that term very loosely, in 1952. And the music is called 4 minutes 33, and it's silence. It's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, or just some ambient noise. And John Cage described it, and I love this, as the absence of intentional noise. What a great excuse that would have been at school, to hand in a blank piece of paper to your maths teacher and say it's the absence of intentional maths. But I think he was really brave. Not just brave to sell tickets to that concert, but brave to play with silence, because we're uncomfy with silence. We're uncomfy with space. And I think that's something deep within us. I think it's almost prehistoric. I think we like the crackle of the campfire and that reassuring chatter of people around us. I think we like noise, but I think that noise, that crackle and that chatter, now they've become too much. I think there's too much of both, and we need to be brave and somehow break away from those things. And I think this means shutting the office door, possibly, or going somewhere for a bit of a walk. It could even mean putting some music on. I'd recommend a bit of John Cage. But maybe working somewhere different, going off-site. But it's about creating some space for you to recover, possibly getting some good food into you rather than crisps, making sure that you hydrate. And then once you've recovered, taking the time that you need to think on your own or with other people. But what people often say is, yeah, that's all very well, but we're busy. And that's the thing, we are busy. But are we busy with the right things? Or are we busy with things that take up our time but achieve relatively little? And I think that we can create space, again, by being brave. And that word brave is in my mind a lot with this stuff. But we can create space by being brave and making a conscious decision to control less and to allow more. And even when I say those words, you can probably feel it. Control almost seems to close things down, doesn't it? It's finite. And the word allow seems to open up possibilities. I was talking to the head of a large secondary school recently, and I asked her, I said, what would happen if you didn't come to school for a day, if you just didn't come in tomorrow? And you could see the fear in her eyes. and then she thought about it for a while, and she said, possibly begrudgingly, she said, actually it would probably be okay. And I pushed it a bit. I said, okay, what if you didn't come in for 2 or 3 days? Whoa. And then she sort of smiled and said, actually, yeah, do you know what? It would probably be okay. And I said, why? She said, well, people know what they're doing. I've actually got a really good team. We've got a good program. And then, and this was really telling, she laughed and she said, you know what, they might like it, actually. They might like me not being around, not meddling, not giving direction, not getting in their way. And, I think that's a real breakthrough when we realise that sometimes our involvement isn't what's required. Last summer, I did a motorboat course on Lake Windermere up in Cumbria, and on this day it was a cold, clear morning. There was no wind. The lake was perfectly flat, and my only role was to steer this boat in a straight line towards a particular landmark. It was a hotel with a dome and lovely lawns coming down to the lake, and it was, all I had to do was go in a straight line. But this infernal boat would not go straight. I'd steer to the right, and I'd sort of steer to the left a bit, and then I'd have to correct to the right. And I was driving like a cartoon character, where you're fiddling with the wheel and nothing's happening. And to my right was the instructor, and I sort of felt his presence, like Obi-Wan Kenobi in shorts. And I looked over, and he had that smug smile of a man who has seen it all before. And he said, what are you doing, Neil? And I said, I think there's something wrong with the boat. It just won't go straight. And he said, just take your hand off the wheel for a moment. And I did. And do you know what happened? No, it didn't sink. We went in a perfectly straight line. My meddling and my interference had been doing more harm than good. But we like to control things, don't we? We like to have that sense of control. But more often, it does more harm than good. If I asked you, do you like to control things, you'd probably say, yeah. If I said, do you like to be controlled, with a few unusual exceptions, you'd probably say, no, absolutely not. We work better when we're given as much freedom of action as possible. Clear direction, yes, but then as much freedom as you can to achieve things on your own terms. I have this idea that control casts a really big shadow. And to minimise that shadow, we actually need to do less. We need to speak less. We need to decide less. And we need to meddle less, stay out of the way. It's a brave approach which involves being in fewer loops, checking less detail and having fewer meetings. And I think if we do that, we can insist on a way of working which actually would allow us more. We could have a more sustainable way of working, and from that we would be more happy, and we would be more resilient, and we would be more productive. The American general Hal Moore said, and I actually have this sellotaped underneath my computer screen at home, he said, there's always one more thing you can do to influence a situation in your favour. Full stop. And after that, there's one more thing. Well, right now, I believe that one thing is to pause. And the thing after that is to allow. Thank you very much.